Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Joseph Clarke. I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Art History at the University of Toronto. I am joined today by my colleague, Christy Anderson, professor in the Art History Department. She and I initiated the Canada Constructed project a few years ago with the aim of not just developing new coursework on Canadian architecture, but of engaging with others involved in Canadian architecture, heritage, and history, and really drawing on and hopefully contributing to something of a pedagogical renaissance in the study of Canadian architecture. We're also really working to highlight connections between academic inquiry into the history of the built environment and fields where people are applying research in architectural history. And that really brings us to the topic of today's conversation about careers and related opportunities. We have many students at U of T, and I suspect other institutions, who are passionate about architectural history and are trying to think through what their path after graduation might look like. So we're joined today by a panel of exciting researchers and professionals who graduated not too long ago and have successfully navigated that transition and are applying their knowledge of architectural history in different ways. So our plan is to begin by introducing all four speakers, and then we will hear from each of them and we'll have some time to discuss. And during the discussion, for members of the audience, feel free to, if you have questions, to go ahead and put those in the chat, and we will hopefully be able to open up the discussion and get to as many of those questions as we can. So let me go ahead and introduce a couple of our speakers. Joël Léon is a Toronto-based architectural researcher and designer. He works as an associate at Denegri Basai Studio, which specializes in residential and small commercial projects. And he's also the programming director of the Toronto Society of Architects. Joël is a graduate of the University of Toronto undergrad and Master of Architecture programs, and his career path has led him to explore a variety of positions at the intersection of the built environment and community that he will be talking about. Our next panelist will be Jessica Mace. She is the editor-in-chief of the Journal of the Society for the Study of Architecture in Canada. She also is the co-author of the recent book, Identity on the Land, Company Towns in Canada. Jessica has served on the executive committee of the Association of Critical Heritage Studies, and we're happy to say that she's a postdoctoral fellow here at the U of T Art History Department, where she teaches courses on the history of Canadian architecture and landscapes, and she helps organize the Canada Constructed initiative. And I'll hand it over to Christy to introduce our other two speakers.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christy Anderson. I'm professor in the Department of Art History and a member of the faculty at the Daniels School, and co-organizer with Joseph of the Canada Constructed project. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I've asked people if you like to pop into the chat and say where you're coming from, which program, because although this is happening out of U of T, we are very happy to have people from all over. I will introduce the next two speakers. Loryssa Quattrociocchi is a heritage planner at the City of Toronto on the Toronto Heritage Survey team, where her research has formed the basis of the Heritage Conservation District studies and plans, the cultural heritage resource assessments, designation and listing reports, and heritage evaluations. She is presently a DPhil in history candidate at Oxford University. She holds an MA in art history and visual culture from the University of Guelph and a BA in art history and film studies from York University. Alexis Cohen is an associate at ERA Architects here in their Toronto office. Alexis contributes to and manages a range of projects involving heritage evaluation, building character analysis, area studies, heritage interpretation, and public engagement. She is one of U of T's own. And I have to say, the first student that I met when I came to U of T in 2005, she received her BA in art history from U of T, and then her PhD in architectural history from Princeton, working on issues of utility and architectural drawing and image making in Britain around the years 1800. She's worked at ERA on projects such as Mirvish Village and Front Street in Toronto, as well as projects in Alberta and Ottawa. In addition to her research and analysis for ERA, she has also published widely on her PhD work, as well as on preservation and heritage subjects. So thank you to all four of you. And what we'd like to do as a way of just getting started is to ask each of the speakers, and if it's okay, we'll just go in the order in which we introduced you, to say a few words about what it is that you do and how you got there. And just a few minutes of that. You're welcome, Joelle and Loryssa. I haven't texted you to say you're welcome. If you have images, you can share if you like. If not, that's fine. And we'll just kind of go through everyone, and then we have some questions for discussion, and then we'll open it up to everyone. So, Joelle, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I think what I'll do is I'll share some links after introducing myself, because what you'll learn is a lot of the projects I do are very publicly accessible. We have lots of links and you can kind of explore. But my name is Joelle. I started my path at U of T, where I was studying architecture back in the day when architecture was an arts and science program. So a very unique combination, because it meant that architecture history were a lot of my classes. That was a lot of the faculty that I interacted with. And it was the first time I was being exposed to Canadian architecture. I grew up in Venezuela, so Canadian architecture was all very new and novel to me. And once I graduated, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I've taken all kinds of summer jobs, and I took the position of never saying no to interesting opportunities. So I worked at a city councilor's office as a constituency assistant, and that gave me one perspective of the city. And I have worked as a draftsman for the TDSB, where I got to go to lots of different schools and draw them up. And then I realized that I was as much of interested to find the historic documents behind those schools as I was to visit the new ones. And where things started to gel together was I took an interesting opportunity. It was a one-year opportunity with the Ontario Associations of Architects called the Architectural Graduate. And it's a one-year position with the regulator for architecture in the province. And you kind of get to work with all the staff. And what I found there is they had a blog that didn't get a lot of views. It had existed for a really long time, and no one wanted to write for it because architects are very shy to do their own writing. They wanted it to be cleaned and processed in a very clean image, and blogs don't really work that way. And I started writing about the Pan Am Games. They were happening, and I was like, oh, there's all these cool new venues that have been built. Let's start writing about them. Let's reach out to architects. It ended up being really successful. It kind of became my job during that year of the OAA, so I kind of helped define my own position. We wrote all kinds of series. We had a series of women in architecture, which was the first time actually looking at the stats of how women were represented in the profession, who were the first women to be licensed in Ontario, what were their projects. And after that, I got an interesting connection with a local society. And for those of you who don't know, in Ontario, we're really unique. We have a regulator body, but we also have these little advocate societies. And I say little, but they're not that little. So the little one I am part of now, the Toronto Society of Architects, is about half the size of the regulator of Ontario. So it's quite a large society, 2,000 members, but it's a volunteer-based organization. That's how I was born. I was born out of a group of architects that drank beer every Friday night to discuss architecture. They offered me a part-time position to help with the admin, and it has grown into an almost full-time job. I help now coordinate initiatives that are of all kinds and shapes. So from an online database documenting contemporary modern architecture in the GTA, which we will launch very soon. Walking tours throughout the city, that's an 11-year program where we take people out and talk about architecture. Lectures, networking events, and really applying kind of that knowledge of architecture, but with that public lens. So those opportunities I got in City Hall or at the OAA to talk to the public, figuring out how do we translate what we know about architecture and our passion to everybody else. And that's really interesting. That's a whole other type of writing, a whole other type of talking, a whole other way of communicating that you don't often get exposed to, right? And that to me was really, really exciting. It's worth mentioning though, that I also use my architectural education and kind of the history aspect of it a lot in my own firm. So I work at a small studio, De Negri Besai Studio. It's my other hat. And we approach all our projects first by asking ourselves, who built this house? What was the intention? What was there? How can we contribute to the story? And that's a really meaningful way of starting design. So you never know where it will take you. Being able to write about architecture also means that I'm the one who does our requests for proposals, and those are very important to get those jobs. So I'm often working on the marketing and communications and business side of architecture, and that all came from being able to write about architecture, being able to find information on architecture. So translating those skills into very, very unique skills. And in architecture, if you have those skills, you will have a job, because there's not a lot of people who can write. That's a quick summary. I will share some of the resources I was talking about and some of the initiatives I work on the chat, and I'll pass over to Jess.
Thank you, Joelle.
All right, I brought some images so you don't have to just look at my face while I'm chatting, and because we're all visual people, we like looking at images. So there we go. Okay, so I'm going to share first kind of what I do, and then I'm going to talk to you about how I got there. So what do I do? So Joseph mentioned that I am a postdoctoral fellow. So that means that I work in academia, which is the university sector, right? So a postdoctoral fellow is often a kind of nebulous term, but it's a type of short-term position and funding that's available to those who have completed a PhD. So most often it's considered as a kind of building block in a person's academic career. Often these are centered on research, but not always. Like my current postdoc, for example, is funded by the Learning and Education Advancement Fund. So the focus here is to build up interest in Canadian architecture, landscapes, and history in the Department of Art History and beyond. So what I do is develop and teach undergraduate courses. I set up and supervise internships. I conduct interviews. I work on events. I develop resources, work on creating a website, and more. So we often tend to think about, or if I know there are a lot of undergrads in the room right now, and the kind of vision of an academic is as a lone wolf, right? Someone who sits alone in their study and does some reading and writing, and that sounds dreamy, but that's not all it is. So my job, I really work quite closely with a lot of different kinds of people. So for instance, teaching, right? I work really closely with students, and it can be really quite creative, right? And the challenge over the last couple of years has been, how do we do this? How do we create a meaningful learning experience, an engaging experience, regardless of the mode of delivery? And some of my favorite classes, not just of the past few years, but overall, are classes on Canadian architecture or Toronto architecture, because we can explore the city together. We can learn on site. And if you look closely at that photo on the left, you will see Joelle guiding us on a little tour this past fall on a very, very rainy day. I apologize again for that, Joelle. And so we can do this kind of thing, right? We can visit buildings, we can talk about them on site, but it also allows, when we're talking about these kinds of local things, it allows for experiential learning through community partnerships. So I'm going to give you the example here from my 4th year seminar last year on Canadian architecture, where students worked very closely with the ACO Next Gen organization, so the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario. So they collaborated through my class with the ACO Next Gen to work on and write articles that were posted for the public. So the link is there. I'll put it in the chat after if anyone's interested in reading these really awesome student articles. So I worked with the students for this, I worked with a community partner for this, but I also worked with the Experiential Learning Office to figure out how this could be done. So there's really a lot of collaboration and learning for me, even just in the process, kind of behind the scenes of a course. Relatedly, and we can talk about this a little bit more later on, I also supervise and work with students while they're in internship placements. So I help connect them to the partner organization. I help them set goals, translate their experiences to their resumes, and so on. And that also means that I work closely with community partners, and I'm showing you just a few examples here of our current partners and some placements that students have done recently. Right, so I chat a lot with people. I take a lot of meetings. We discuss these options, these opportunities. So it's been really great connecting U of T students with wonderful people and getting them some real world experience. Right, and this is really rewarding also for me just personally to meet all kinds of new people, but also working on and thinking through new projects and collaborations for the department. So my day-to-day is really a lot more varied and social than you might think. Okay, so how did I get here? Like a lot of you, I noticed in the chat, I did my undergraduate degree in art history, which included architectural history. And I was dead set on doing art conservation following graduation. So I was going to restore paintings, I was going to restore two-dimensional objects. And it wasn't until my 4th year, after having taken all the chemistry requisites and all, the studio components, stuff like that, that I was able to take a course on conservation where I realized that my interest was less in the care of the object than figuring out what it was, what it meant, what it was all about. So sort of like Joelle, getting really curious about, how do we tell these stories? So I decided instead of pursuing a master's degree in conservation, I decided to do a master's degree in art history without quite knowing yet what that might look like. But then I took a Canadian architecture course in the first term of my first year of my master's course. And I was amazed. So I wrote a class paper on a building that I thought was really well known to everyone, and there'd be a ton of documentation. So you can see the title there, Trafalgar Castle. There was nothing written about it. So this really kind of opened up my eyes to the possibilities. And I submitted this for a prize that I won. I was flown to Yellowknife to present my paper at a conference. It was published in a journal. And the rest, my friends, is history. This is where I decided I needed to be. I needed to focus and continue on with my studies. So I decided to do a PhD in Canadian architecture from here. And I'll send the link to the Martin Ely Weil Prize later on because it's currently open. So I did my PhD at York University. And then after that, I decided that I wasn't quite done. I wanted to keep researching. So my PhD looked at domestic architecture, Gothic revival in Canada in particular. So I decided to apply to a research postdoc, which is where I worked on still looking at domestic architecture, but looking at them in kind of ensembles. So looking at industrial settings and company towns in particular. So I did that at the University of Quebec in Montreal. And of course, as part of being an academic and doing research, you do things like conferences and guest talks and publish papers and all of that kind of stuff. But I think the most impactful thing for me out of that postdoc experience was getting really involved in the activities of the department. So I'm showing you just a little slide here of the 4 different conferences that I helped to plan during that time. So for a variety of organizations, a variety of different topics. So 4 major conferences. I also ended up in a lot of other kinds of projects. So I co-edited 2 books. I edited one by myself. I co-authored a book, as Joseph mentioned. I co-curated an exhibition. And throughout all this time, I traveled across Canada as well as the entire world, from Brazil to China to Australia, in doing all of these different things. So I made a ton of connections. I found out a lot about myself in working on all of these different kinds of projects. So the one last thing that I wanted to mention that came out of that first postdoc at UQAM was that my supervisor had arranged for me a guest editorship of the Journal of the Society for the Study of Architecture in Canada. Clearly, I made an impression on the editor at the time because he decided to hand over the reins. So we worked on a transition plan. And I've been editor-in-chief of that publication since 2015. So the journal is a twice-yearly peer-reviewed publication. So in this role, I work really closely with authors. I read a lot. I work with reviewers, with copy editors, the graphics team. I work with distribution to produce the journal. So it's a ton of work, but it's been a really, really great experience. And in doing this, I've learned so much about the field and have made some really great connections. If you want to know who's working on what in the country, I'm your girl. Let me know. I know what everybody's working on. So all of this sort of quick overview is just to show you that, you know, in academia, things might look a little bit different. And again, sort of like Joelle, I have a policy of trying new things, of, you know, not saying no, and you really never know exactly where it's going to take you. So that's it for me. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Jess.
Thanks, Jess.
Loryssa, if you have images you can share or not.
I unfortunately did not prepare any images, so you'll have to look at my face.
That's
Much less
okay.
exciting than Jess's presentation was, so I apologize. But hi, everyone. I'm Loryssa. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. So Christy did a fairly good job at summarizing my academic background. So I'll talk a little bit, I think, about sort of how I got into this professional world of conservation and what I do now in my work. And so I entered the world of conservation in a professional sense, sort of unintentionally. I think like many students that pursue master's or PhD programs, you often think that academia is the only trajectory for you in a professional sense. And that was very much the world that I was coming from. But I found that when I moved back to Toronto from the UK, when I was coming back here to sort of write up for my DPhil dissertation, I felt like I was really out of touch with what was going on in the city, in the architecture, and the conservation world. So I sought out some organizations that were actively involved in the sector in an attempt to really just understand what was going on and make sure that I was up to date with what was going on in the discourse. And so through sort of researching organizations, I found the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario's Next Gen group, which Jess had mentioned. And I ended up joining their executive committee for a few years. And through that organization, I gained access to a whole slew of networking opportunities, exclusive events, publishing opportunities, etc. And it became this place where I can interact with like-minded people and network with established professionals in the field. And then I also got involved with the ACO's Toronto branch as well. So it's a provincial organization. So they have various branches throughout the province. And I was situated in Toronto, so I got involved in the Toronto branch. And ACO Next Gen is specifically specifically within the umbrella of ACO, and it's meant for students and emerging professionals who are interested in conservation in the built environment. So it was a perfect place for me to get involved in as I was in the early stages of my career, sort of trying to understand what this world entailed. And it was actually through the ACO that I met my now manager at the City of Toronto. And I sort of asked her if she could meet me for a coffee date to pick her brain about what career opportunities there were at the city, what the department was like, the types of skills that are required of people that work in the heritage planning department at the city. And she had actually told me about an upcoming job competition that was going to be posted online for a research trainee position in heritage planning at the city. And the research trainee is sort of the city equivalent to a paid internship position. And it's a really good segue into the city for an early career researcher, an early career person. And I was successful in that job competition. And I began that position, I believe it was in September of 2019. And then shortly after that, I submitted my application for another job competition for an assistant heritage planner position within the same department. And then I believe it was last year. Yep, last year was 2021. Sorry, time all seems like it's part of the same year now. But last year I was successful in a job competition for a heritage planner position with the Toronto Heritage Survey team. And that's the team that I'm currently working on now. But in addition to working on sort of things that are involved that have to do with the Toronto Heritage Survey, I'm working on various other heritage planning documents that the city works on. So heritage conservation district plans and studies, cultural heritage resource assessments. I'm actively writing designation and listing reports that we bring to council to add properties to the city's heritage register. And those are really a few of the things that I'm working on. And I'm realizing now I should have brought in some images of some of the properties that I've worked on reports for, but I can mention a couple that come to my head right now that were really, really fun projects to work on. And one of them was the designation report for the South Humber Park Pavilion. For those of you that know of it, you might know it better as the Oculus. That's more typically what it's known as. And it's sort of this wonderful googie architecture pavilion within the park that you basically have to stumble across. And it was designated on the city's heritage register, and it was also recently restored by GIMO Architects. And I believe ACO is organizing some programming that's going to be going on there as well. And if you haven't visited, I highly recommend you visit. Maybe wait till the weather gets a little bit nicer. It's beautiful in the fall and in the summer and in the spring. So I would highly recommend visiting there. And another project that I've been working on now for quite some time is the Danforth Avenue Cultural Heritage Resource Assessment. So we're essentially conducting a survey of all of the properties fronting Danforth Avenue from Broadview to Coxwell, for those of you that live in Toronto and know of what that street entails. So it's been a built form survey of 650 properties, which has been quite a feat, but it's been such a great learning opportunity, and it's been a great way to be able to use some of my architectural history knowledge, and I think just my knowledge of conducting built form surveys, which you typically end up I'm sure that most of you have involved yourself in built form surveys at some point in your academic careers. When you're conducting research on a particular property, you do a site visit, a built form survey, try to understand the history of the property. So it was a lot of that, just on a larger scale. And yeah, I think I'll end it there, and I'll answer probably some more questions as we move forward.
Thank you, Loryssa. Alexis, and you should be able to share.
Great. Can everyone see that? Great. Thumbs up. Okay. So first of all, thank you so much to Canada Constructed for the invitation to be here, and to the other panelists, familiar faces and moderators. It's a pleasure to join this conversation. As Christy mentioned, I currently work at ERA Architects, which is a multidisciplinary heritage-focused architecture and planning firm that employs staff from a range of backgrounds and disciplines, including architects, urban planners, landscape architects, conservation specialists, historians, and architectural historians. And that's my background, as Christy mentioned. I thought it would be interesting to look briefly at a few of the office's projects. So not just my own projects. These are sort of collaborative endeavors, some that began before I joined the firm and some that I have been involved with, as a way to explore the question, how does historical research connect to the world of cultural heritage and conservation? And so starting off with Concrete Toronto, which is a book project, Michael McClelland, one of the company's founders, is really interested in exploring things that people don't like. In this case, concrete architecture. And so he got a group of people together to contribute to a book project that gives some attention to a topic. Similarly, the ward was looking at Toronto's first immigrant neighborhood, which was demolished. It was razed to make way for new city hall. So exploring things that are lost in the past from our history and why other things took their place. These collaborative projects are connected to the idea of community, and they raise questions that are central to the field of heritage conservation, namely what has value and who determines what has value. And from that, we can ask, how do you write histories of places like Toronto that have diverse values that are valued in different ways by different communities? And so at Honest Ed's and Mirvish Village, the history and meaning of this place is rooted in community associations with it, in the personal stories that people have about this place as much as the building itself. So it raises some interesting questions for historians that are trained outside of engagement practices or other kinds of research involving interviews, et cetera. Welcome to Blackhurst Street, which was part of the engagement for the redevelopment of Mirvish Village, was a collaborative exhibition that explored the history of Black excellence, artistry, activism, and entrepreneurship in the Bloor and Bathurst neighborhood through a partnership with a different book list and the curator Chinidu Akabam. And for those of you who don't know, a different book list is an independent multicultural bookstore specializing in books from the African, Caribbean diaspora and the global South. And it's interesting to consider businesses like a different book list that are also cultural hubs and function as community leaders, in addition to the types of organizations that we've been talking about that are also important to the field. Dragon Center in Scarborough was North America's first indoor Chinese mall, adaptively reused as a roller rink and opened in 1984. And it became an important community hub with huge meaning for the Chinese Canadian community and is now undergoing redevelopment. And with a group led by Howard Tam, pictured here, who works, his company Think Fresh, we also collaborated with Daniels School of Architecture staff and students, including Erica Allen Kim and the photographer Morris Lum, and this is one of Morris's photos, as well as with historian Camille Beijing, who also works at Heritage Toronto. So together and with others, we explored ways of documenting, understanding, researching, and commemorating suburban retail spaces, and in this instance, that have significance for the Chinese Canadian community. This is not an ERA project, but through the Dragon Center work, we were connected to the research of Professor Zixi Shuang at X University, who teaches a course on multicultural cities in the planning department. And in the world of conservation, it's becoming increasingly important to be aware of the complexity of issues that intersect with our traditional objects of study. So we can't look at buildings in isolation from the people who use them and the patterns of use, in this case, global migration, and understanding patterns that work at a local, national, and international scale is so critical to the work that we do. And then finally, I'll just end here. This is an image of the lands at Waterridge Village in Ottawa on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin people, where we're working on a commemoration program for these lands. So how to tell the history of these lands in commemorative strategies, plaques, plantings, park design, other kinds of design tools that help share the meaning of a place. And to understand this place, we need to understand Indigenous associations with these lands, which in turn need to be told from Indigenous perspectives. And for those of us who are not Indigenous, part of our work and an important part of our work involves making space for these perspectives and also learning from them. So these are just a selection of projects that really call upon training in architectural history, but also call upon other related skill sets, collaborations, and partnerships that are part of the world of heritage conservation and exist both inside academia and outside of it. I'll end there. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alexis. And thanks to all four of you for giving us four portraits of quite different, but all very successful early career professionals. It's really exciting to see how all of you are working with architectural history and engaging it in different ways in everything that you do. I'm going to ask a question that you've all, I think, started to answer, but maybe you could expand on a little bit, and then we can just go around, and I guess we'll go around in the same order again. I'm curious what aspects of what you learned in your architectural history courses are you actively using today? As an architectural history professor, I ask this with some trepidation. But Joelle mentioned writing skills, and perhaps there are other kinds of skills or knowledge that have really stuck with you and that you feel have helped to form you into the kind of professional that you are today. And part two of the question is, were there experiences that you had during your, particularly during your schooling, outside of your formal coursework? So maybe internships or other kinds of social or work activities that you feel that have stuck with you and that have been the basis for your work after that. So maybe Joelle, do you want to start?
Sure. So answering the first one, I mean, definitely writing has played a much bigger role than I thought would in my career. But I also think there was two other aspects in there that were, one, where to find information. Those research skills are super valuable. It is, Canadian architecture in particular is not always easy to find. It is not always on Google. And so being able to know where to look has a lot of value. I think the other aspect, though, because I both studied kind of a lot of courses within the fine arts history, but then a lot of my other education was within the School of Architecture at a very particular moment in its history. I really lacked knowledge on Canadian architecture during my studies. And a lot of the work I've done afterwards is to fill that gap. I felt that all my examples were US examples or European examples, and that there was like no architecture in Canada to enjoy. And so that actually was a huge motivator for me to explore Toronto and learn about its history, and then be like, wow, I have a lot more to learn and a lot of stories to share. So that was that had a really big role. The other experience that really shaped me a lot. I think of an activity was the last year of my master's was the 125th anniversary of the School of Architecture. And because I had already started to dig into archives, I was very lucky to have the position to be one of the 3 people who put together an exhibit describing 125 years of architectural education at U of T. And that was like going into the basement of 230 College at that time, where everything had been thrown into and kept and never sent to the U of T archives. And digging what was there, digging what was in the archives, trying to find like alumni, calling them, trying to find it. And that really brought kind of the history aspect alive. The idea that, architecture history is a huge detective hunt. It's really fun. You get to meet a lot of people. You get to know stories that you would have never known, spaces. And so that exhibit was probably the first time I got the opportunity to try to explain something that could be very, very boring, like 125 years of teaching. And you're like, okay, how interesting it is to do that, to be like, wow, this is really exciting. We had like the first computer that the school used, color wheels that were invented in the School of Architecture, a description of a weird period when the student union had 50% control of the school. And their president at that moment received the title, because they didn't believe in presidents, the Mad Hatter of All That Matters, and meetings were called tea parties. And finding that this was an aspect of architecture history was really exciting. It was like, also taught me that the social part was just as important as the buildings.
I guess that's me for going in order. Yeah, I guess aspects from my architectural history education, for me, the content is fairly obvious. And I think that's sort of the first thing that a lot of people think of when they're trying to decide where to go. And I think it can also inhibit a lot of people, or restrict a lot of people in their thinking. So it shouldn't, right? We don't have to be bogged down by these specialties or the precise dates or details that you learned in your classes. To give an example, I have a friend who did her PhD on medieval architectural history in Norway and the British Isles, and she just got a heritage planner job at the city of Caledon, right? So it's not necessarily that specific knowledge that you take from your courses, but building on what Joelle was saying, it's a lot of those learning skills, right? It's a lot of those other kinds of things that you pick up throughout your education that are really important. So research, absolutely huge, right? Just that knowledge, knowing where to look, how to do it. Things like communication, whether it's written, whether it's oral, teamwork, right? Even time management is a huge thing. And just that basic visual literacy, right? Understanding how to parse something or to read it visually. These are all really transferable skills that, it can carry over to so many things. It doesn't just sort of narrow you in one particular direction. So for me, extracurriculars or other experiences, I was not the best undergrad. I will be the first to admit. I was on a varsity team at the time, so a lot of my efforts went into competing and training and stuff like that. But that did really teach me some very, very valuable time management skills. And it translated well into my graduate studies in that I knew how to have a life on the side. I've seen so many people get really burnt out because they're really just focused on that one thing, or they're pulling all-nighters. But I kind of had that balance. Also, the ability to read in a moving vehicle is something you should never neglect. That's something I learned from my varsity team experience. But I also volunteered as a docent in my undergrad, which was really formative for me. So I went to Queen's. I volunteered at the Agnes Etherington Art Center. And that's sort of where I caught the bug for storytelling, right? For translating the visual, communicating it to an audience, and sort of interacting with people. So that was quite formative. I had in my master's degree a really lackluster internship. So basically my advisor said, here, do you want to work with this organization? The organization said, sure, write us a paper. And that was it. I don't know if they did anything with it. I don't think they did. I never met with anyone. I never talked with anyone. And so that's shaped me quite a bit in what I'm doing now, right? In setting up internships for U of T students, trying to make connections that are actually valuable, where the student is going to have a meaningful learning experience, to gain some valuable skills, to contribute to that organization, and to actually see their work kind of come through. So any U of T students in the audience, we're going to be posting a new round of internships for the summer coming out soon. So keep your eyes peeled. Maybe Christy might share the link, but it's canadaconstructed.ca, and you can just click on internships and we'll post it sort of in the same networks that you saw advertised for this. Otherwise, for me, in my PhD and in my postdoc, I started volunteering for a lot of stuff, just, like we said before, just trying new things. So I volunteered to be on the board of the Society for the Study of Architecture in Canada. I served as the Ontario representative and then as the secretary. And that forged a lot of connections for me that led to my editorship. I've also been volunteering for the past few years on the board of the Association of Critical Heritage Studies, which is an international organization. So I've been able to really make some great connections across the world, even if our meeting times are a little bit strange on Zoom. But yeah, so put yourself out there. I'm an introvert. It took me a long time to sort of put myself out there, do these experiences, meet with people, but I assure you it can be worth it if you put the time in.
Thanks, Jess. And I like the story about the discouraging internship that you sort of turned lemons into lemonade, and that experience was something that you're actually able to reflect on and help you to in the work that you're doing now. Loryssa?
Yeah, so as an architectural historian, I think getting into the job field, I was incredibly nervous about how the knowledge that I had was going to be beneficial in a career trajectory sense. And similar to actually the friend that Jess was mentioning, I have a very specific academic background as well. Like I specialize in 19th century Gothic Revival church architecture. So in my mind, I was like, how am I going to use this in potentially a heritage planning position at a municipality? And I found actually that so many of the skills that I learned in architectural history school have been beneficial in my career. And so I think that Joelle had touched upon this, that ability to conduct in-depth research using primary and secondary sources it has been integral to my work, and the fact that I've already known how to examine assessment roles, building records, historic mapping, that type of thing, has really given me a kickstart. And because it's fairly time consuming to learn how to interpret those documents and understand where to even look for those documents. So to have that foundational understanding was great coming into my role at the City of Toronto, and then even just that general knowledge of architectural styles has been incredibly beneficial as well. So I'm oftentimes writing listing or designation reports, and there's always a section within those reports on architectural styles. And so having a general understanding of what characterizes different styles, or even the resources to access to figure out more about styles that you're less familiar with, is incredibly beneficial as well. And you have a lot of those tools already being a student in architectural history school. And then as I mentioned before about the large built form survey that I conducted, having that ability beforehand to know how to conduct built form surveys, whether it's one property or 650, it's been incredibly beneficial as well to learn how to examine the built form and interpret the built form, and then write about the built form in an eloquent way has been incredibly beneficial. And actually, I just want to echo what Jess said about time management. So when I was applying for my position at the city, in the job description, it said high-paced and high-stress environment, and boy, were they not kidding. You're typically on so many different projects with competing deadlines that change sometimes a week before something is due, and then you have to work on the fly to figure out how you're going to get everything done. So having that ability to manage your time, which I think a lot of students become really good at when you're working on, let's say, 4 different research papers or something like that, having that ability to understand what you need to prioritize and how much time certain things take you has been a great skill to have. And in terms of what I did outside of the classroom that I think contributed to my current career and skill set is that I try to involve myself in as many organizations that are active in the sector as possible. So I had mentioned the ACO, for instance, but there's really so many more. There's Heritage Toronto, if you're thinking within the city of Toronto, as Jess mentioned, the Society for the Study of Architecture in Canada. I've attended many of their conferences, including the one that Jess planned in Niagara-on-the-Lake, which was absolutely wonderful. And those opportunities, they give you the chance to just speak with people who have been in the profession for a very long time, who are knowledgeable, who want to help. That's the thing too. It oftentimes feels like a burden going and chatting with these people, but they really do want to help you in your career development. So don't be nervous to go and seek out these organizations and speak to these different types of people. And it's been beneficial for me. And yeah, like I think that sometimes if you send just a cold email to someone asking them to meet you for a virtual coffee date or something. I mean, admittedly, I did that with Alexis several years ago. I had emailed her and said, can we meet up for coffee? I really want to pick your brain about what your job is like, what's going on in the sector. And it proved to be such a beneficial and fruitful conversation for me to have with her. So put yourself out there as much as you can and try and get yourself involved with these organizations and align yourself with these people.
Fantastic. Thank you. Alexis?
Echoing what everyone's already said, completely agree with all of that. Research, writing, critical thinking, visual analysis, these are hard skills. The humanities can give STEM a run for their money. These are absolutely hard skills that are invaluable. Above all, I think the ability to explore a topic, a place, an event from multiple perspectives and using a range of sources that you can interrogate critically. That's something that the humanities teaches us broadly, not just architectural history. And I think another thing I take from undergraduate studies is the ability to stay in conversations. In the humanities, there can be a debate that lasts centuries, and to understand how ideas mutate and shift and how these conversations unfold. This idea that ideas and debates have a historical context is something I think we need more now than ever, and the ability to understand issues from multiple perspectives while also being able to engage in dialogue. So I think the humanities absolutely provides this type of training, and understanding history helps us understand our present moment, which I think we all need. Just briefly on the second question. So I think goals for outside the classroom are very personal and very dependent on circumstance. And I was lucky enough to have access to co-op programs and summer work programs and that kind of thing, committee work. But if you don't, there's so many other things that you can do that are so simple, that are just about experiencing the place where you are, where you live, where you study, where you're visiting, be in those public spaces, experience the subway, experience downtown, experience the suburbs. And those experiences will be invaluable. In the work that we do, a file will land on your desk and it's about a little building in a random neighborhood. And if you have some familiarity, you're already ahead of the game. So don't underestimate how much you can achieve by just experiencing the place where you live. And I think relatedly, to Laryssa's point and others about reaching out to others, having conversations, that can happen in a formal informational interview setting, in job interviews, but it can also happen very casually, wherever you are in your workplace, in an organization, in a volunteer context, and that those contacts also lead to other things. So experiences and connections will always lead to other things. And if you're feeling like you can't get that internship or you can't get on that committee, don't worry. There's so many other paths to sort of get to the next step in your life.
Thank you all so much. We have a couple questions in the chat, and let me read the first one, but let me just say that please, everyone who's here, including the speakers, if you have questions, we will try to have time for people to raise their hands, but just for the moment, if you want to put the question or comment in the chat, we'll go through them in the order. So the one that came in from Natalie asked, what helped you navigate uncertainty as you progressed towards your career or tried to identify your career? For instance, like what was useful, helpful advice, mantras, skills, etc. So I'll just open that up. Anybody who how did they deal with the uncertainty of finding your job or finding your first position?
I'll break the silence.
Go ahead, Joelle.
I take it one step at a time. That uncertainty of where you're going, that doesn't leave for a lot of the times, at least for someone like me. I want to try new things and I want to do something that I haven't done before. And I throughout all my time, I haven't quite known exactly what the next step will look like. So I enjoy the moment I am in. And really, if you cultivate good relationships, you connect with people, you never know what opportunities will come, right? So did I ever imagined, my current role, the programming director for the Toronto Society of Architects, that has never existed. I joined a volunteer organization that has existed for 135 years as a volunteer organization, and somehow a job emerged from it, right? So you never know. That uncertainty, you kind of have to embrace it and say, it's really exciting. It's a little bit terrifying for sure, but really exciting, and see where it goes. And I think the most important thing is friendships you make along the way. That's the reassuring part, right? So when I don't know where I'm going, or I'm really nervous, or I'm like, whoa, I call someone, I have a coffee, I go talk to someone, and that makes a world of difference. So I don't know if it's super reassuring to know the uncertainty never leaves, but that's a little bit of my experience.
Thanks, Joelle. Anyone else?
Yeah, maybe I'll just jump in on that. There's a lot of precarity in academia, right? So there's a lot of, there have been times where I've had to, kind of cobble together an existence, or I'm not sure where I'm going to be working in the next couple of months. So just echoing what Joelle says, those connections, relying on your personal networks, your professional networks, and finding people that you respect and admire and you trust their opinions, right? So finding those mentors, it doesn't necessarily have to be your primary supervisor, right? We've all heard sort of horror stories about terrible advisors. So find your own, right? Find someone that that inspires you, that that you think has done some really interesting and good stuff, and that's kind of how I I deliberately targeted and went after my first postdoc, because I said, I want to work with her. And so I badgered her at conferences. I sent her emails. We would go for coffees, things like that. And I said, I'd like to work with you. I'm going to put in an application for this funding. She's like, I don't know if you're going to get it, but yeah, I'll support you. And then I got it. And she's like, okay, wow. So here we go. We're working together now. And it was such she did want to take me on, but she just thought it was maybe not going to happen in a difficult funding program, but she's one of my biggest champions even to this day. We don't work together anymore, but having those kinds of people in your corner and to look up to and even just bounce ideas off of, that was so helpful for me and continues to be helpful for me to this day. And I just also want to mention, before we maybe hear from one of the other people, but we were talking about different opportunities. I just wanted to plug quite quickly that I chatted with, I'm going to send this through the chat. I've worked with the ACO Next Gen, and Loryssa mentioned them as well. They're having a job shadow event that anyone can sign up for. The deadline was originally February 6th. I think that's still published on the website, but I've confirmed with them that it's open until tomorrow at 5 p.m. So take a look through there. These are sort of short little job shadows, sort of a day, half a day type of thing. But if you're kind of curious about what a particular job or field might look like, it's really, the TSA is one of those. You could be working with Joelle. If you like what you hear, you can sign up today. So give it a try. It's such a great opportunity. I had some students who did that last year, and they really liked it. They put it on their applications for grad school. I know that was really beneficial for them. So there's that. And then also just wanted to plug, again, the sort of opportunity that kickstarted my academic career, but it could open some other interesting doors for you, is the Martin Eli Weil Prize. And Magda had put in the chat earlier that it closes on March 1st, I believe. So this is a prize for the best essay on the built environment of Canada. So you get a cash prize, $250. You get to go to the conference, which is in Montreal this spring, and you get published in the journal. So you can work with me on shaping up your essay and getting it published. So just some opportunities to throw out there that maybe you didn't know that they existed yet. And then again, U of T students, keep your eyes peeled. I'll have some internships posted for you through the Canada Constructed channels in the coming month or so. Okay, so I'll turn it over to someone else.
I don't know, Loryssa, Alexis, I mean, if you have something to throw in, or.
I don't have anything new to add, but I can attest to the job shadow program that Jess just posted about. I both participated in it and helped plan it when I was with ACO Next Gen. And through the position with the firm that I ended up spending the day with, I ended up getting some contract work afterwards. And it's just all part of that, making connections with people and establishing a network for yourself. That even if you don't get a career potentially out of it, there are these people that can act as a soundboard when you are trying to navigate what you want, what you're deciding that you want to do, and where you could potentially work. They can sort of help guide you in the right direction. They can read your resume or something as simple as that. You know what I mean? It's great to involve yourself in these opportunities and make connections.
We've had great fun with the ACO job shadows. Yeah, it's a great program. I'll just add on this notion of uncertainty, the idea of the myth of the job posting. So I think what we've all conveyed is that there's more flexibility in the working world than there might seem. And there's usually an opportunity to shape the job that you apply for when you're in the organization. Organizations are very malleable, receptive to different skill sets that they may not even know that you have. So to just feel confident that you can shape things for yourself once you're in a job, and to not be deterred, to apply, to see where it takes you. You can always leave.
I need to echo also the support for the job shadow program from ACO. Our current administrator at the TSA was our job shadow last year. So clear connection there between job shadow and getting a job.
That's great to hear about. Well, thank you. So it's been really helpful to hear about your own experiences. But I think all four of you are also involved in working with or supervising or maybe even hiring other people. And we'd be curious to know what kinds of skills and competencies you really value or you really look for in people that you would be working with, or maybe kinds of skills or knowledge that you wish more, especially early career people had.
I can just jump in. It's sort of a version of, I think, what we've all been saying. I mean, first of all, I'll say that I'm really inspired by early career professionals. You know, they're bringing new perspectives, questions, values that I think all our fields need. And then it's back to these skill sets we were speaking about earlier: writing, research, critical thinking. And then on top of that, taking initiative, being engaged, and being prepared for a collaborative environment. I think that, for me at least, was one of the biggest jumps from academia, which can be collaborative, but is often very solitary and individual. It's your name on the paper. Well, when you enter this professional working world, there are 10 people at minimum authoring a report. It's the organization's work. And in order to deliver really complicated projects, to build buildings, to do these complicated studies that Loryssa is referring to, it's incredibly collaborative. So it's all the skill sets that go with basically being a team member.
I'll jump into just to add something that's probably more high level, but it's incredibly useful to ask a ton of questions. So there's so much preparing that you can do for a job, and then there are just certain things that you won't be able to prepare for, and you'll only be able to learn them when you're on the job. So I found when I first started working for the city, for instance, there were all these acronyms being thrown around, and I had no idea what half of them meant. So I would always have to ask, can you just tell me what that acronym means? Can you tell me who I should get in touch with to find this particular resource? Being comfortable enough, I think, in that uncertainty and that knowledge that you don't know a lot of stuff and you will not know everything. So you need to ask a lot of questions and continue to ask them. I'm going to be 3 years with the city this year, and I'm still asking questions all the time. And so I think that's something that people should not be afraid to do when they're in their early portions of their career, even well into their career, actually.
And I think I'll add to that on, one of the things that I look at a lot on people applying is we know that you're just out of school and you're just applying to your first job. So there isn't, there are job postings out there that require a ridiculous amount of experience for a very entry-level job, but I think you can ignore those. Those are poorly written posts. Embrace what you don't know. And instead reflect on we look for the qualities of the person. Like, are you a good researcher? Are you a good listener? Are you a good communicator? Did you write a cover letter that felt special to me that I could be like, yeah, okay, you actually know, you attended an event, you did something. Those kind of things actually make a much bigger impression. And I think a lot of it when you're just starting your career is a lot about, you're not going to know everything. I still don't know everything. I have moments in my firm that I still am like, I have no idea what this is. So being able to be comfortable with not knowing things and expressing that, but then instead showcasing your skills and bring your whole self. It sounds corny, but you have skills and talents and interests that actually will enrich wherever you are, right? And a lot of the times people feel like, oh, you have to be really professional and not show those things. But those are the most interesting parts of you. Like, you really want to know that. And you never know how that could translate into a project. We had someone at the TSA who was really good at drawing. And so one year we decided, hey, instead of our typical executive portrait, we actually did it as a line drawing portrait, right? And we found a way of using their skills to enhance what we do. And that made it more special, right? So don't be afraid to actually, showcase that other side of you that is not the professional side. And they're all professional.
I guess I could just add, I'm not hiring anyone, but I do work with, placing interns and looking at resumes and cover letters and things like that. So again, just sort of picking up on what everyone has said already. Don't be afraid to put yourself in that letter, right? Like the best letter is respond to the post, but also show an interest, right? You have read the posting, you understand a little bit about what the organization does, you're reflecting that in the letter, but you're also showing, why you're interested in this, why you, what makes you special, because those are the letters that stand out rather than the ones that say, I'm applying for this job, I'm interested in the post, here's where I saw it. That's not really going to stand out, right? We do actually want to know a little bit about who you are and why this is an interesting thing for you, why you could be a good fit. And I also get a lot of really timid, or maybe not enough, but really timid emails asking, oh, I'm really sorry to bother you. I have a question about the post, if that's okay. It's great. Ask questions. We want to know that you're engaged, you're thinking through these kinds of things. So don't ever hesitate to reach out and ask a question to, your potential job, to your profs, anything, right? We want to hear from you. That's kind of what we're here for, especially if we're in a hiring position. So yeah.
Sorry, Joseph, can I jump in and ask a question that I know that in the audience, and I know of the panelists, that we have people with different backgrounds. So, people with PhDs, people with professional practice degrees. And I know that in the amongst the audience, there are students coming from students that I know from different departments and different programs. Let me ask this. Well, I can ask this both about the architecture students and the art history students. Do you think that in starting out, like let's say students are finishing their BA, do you think that it is necessary right off the bat that students get an MA or an MArch? Like, in other words, are there positions or ways to get in to the field that people can do right out from a BA? Or do you find that like you really always need an MA or an MArch? I don't know if anybody has feelings about that or thoughts about that.
I can just answer based on experience in our office. Anything's possible. We have students that come in from architecture school, spend a couple of years working, then go do their master's. Many of them come back. I think that's very common in architecture, although I'm not an architect and someone can correct me. There's a lot of fluidity between schooling, training, and professional practice. And of course, professional practice becomes part of how you get licensed. And so there's a lot of flexibility there. And I think the same can be said for other types of roles and positions in the professional world. There's also a lot of movement in the professional world, which is a little bit different in some respects from academia, at least, old school academia. You get a tenure track job and you're sort of in one place for quite a while. There's more movement now in academia than in the past, but a lot of people, change jobs. They spend a couple years in one firm, they go try something else out, and they build their own career through the experience at multiple workplaces. So I think that's another way of saying there's flexibility, and whether you go back to school between job shifts or not, I think there are a lot of options.
Thanks, Alexis.
Maybe I'll speak from the professional degree side, because I'm almost at the end of the very, very long path to licensing. And there's plenty of opportunities for people with BAs. The people I collaborate with within the TSA, that's what they've decided to do. We've had a couple of people who've done it as a 1 or 2 year thing sometimes between deciding what they wanted to study. And that actually exposes you to what the profession actually looks like instead instead of what you think the profession looks like. And then you might discover that there's something called landscape architecture. I can do plants. That's awesome. Let's do that. And so it expands a little bit your world. I think when you're in school, it just kind of looks at like, okay, if you're going to do an MArch, you're going to go become an architect. That's one path. There are architects doing all kinds of different jobs, and usually the ones that have the most interesting jobs is because they took some time to explore other paths, and that helped shape them, right? So I think because it's such a long training in the profession, it's not an instant title. Getting that title of architect, if that's the way you want it to go, it's an 8 to 10 year path. Don't rush it. Right? Make sure that that's what you want to do. Don't feel pressured. Explore other options. It's not a race. You will get to practice for a really long time. So it's okay to take detours, right? And don't feel pressured not to take those detours, because really I have found those are the most interesting people that I get to work with, are the ones who took detours.
Thanks, Joelle. We're kind of, I'm just looking at the time, kind of winding down. I do, either if there are people who have questions who are here in the so-called audience, please raise your hands, stick a question in the chat. I know Joseph and I have a few other things that we want to talk about. I think we'll try to wrap up around 5:30. And I should also just say, as you probably know, when you got onto the Zoom call, that this is being recorded, and we will post it on the Canada Constructed site, or the link to it on YouTube through the Canada Constructed site. So if there are things that you want to see, like things that were in the chat and you didn't get a chance to write them down, you'll be able to do that. Anyways, Jess, Loryssa, if you want to add anything into that discussion, or, also questions that maybe each of you want to ask each other, we'll let that be possible. Joseph, I see you.
I can just jump in with a question that occurs to me. I'm curious if there are any aspects of your education, and I'm thinking especially of your undergraduate education, that you wish that you had done differently, or are there things that you know now that you wish you had known when you were in college? If you feel like sharing, I'm curious. If I think that undergraduates who are listening to this program would be really interested to hear your kind of reflecting back on your own experiences in college, and if there are things that you wish you could, if you'd send a message back to your undergraduate self.
I wasn't very involved with things outside of my courses in my undergrad. And when I did my MArch, I went a very different route. And it was very, very involved with other things. And I wish I had done that sooner. I wish I had gotten more engaged in extracurriculars and community building, and started reaching outside a little bit more, because that has enriched my own experiences and the paths I have taken. And I have been very lucky, but I always say I have never just applied to a job I didn't know anyone already in there. All of them have been because someone gave me a tip, saying, "Oh, there's this opportunity, and we think you'd be a good fit for it." And that came from not always being in my courses. A terrible advice to give in front of professors. Sorry about that.
Yeah, so I'll jump in too. I don't know if this is necessarily something that I could have done differently, or something that my institution could have done differently, but I think there was much less of this type of conversation happening in terms of making people aware of different career paths for people that are in, whether it be art history or architectural history or whatever it is. I sort of just always thought that academia was really the only avenue that you could pursue with this type of a degree. And there's so many more other things that you can pursue, so many ways that your skills could be useful. So I wish that there were more conversations like these. And so I urge all of you to just explore those different avenues and not be afraid to try out something that you may not have been interested in last year, because that it might end up being a career path that's incredibly enriching to you. Sorry, hopefully you don't hear my dog squeaking her toy. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
I can jump in. I think echoing Laryssa's point for sure. I struggled a lot with leaving academia. It felt like a difficult thing to do, not a well-trodden path, when it actually was. It just, wasn't made clear. And then, of course, the Western canon, for those of us who studied it, that's changing now. But if I could go back, I would definitely take a different sort of spectrum of courses. All the projects I mentioned now, there's so much learning on the job related to non-Western heritages, Indigenous heritage. These are things that weren't part of my education that I'm learning now as a professional, and I'm grateful for that opportunity now. But of course, the earlier the better.
Yeah, similarly, I would have taken probably a lot different courses than the ones that I took. I went to a very Renaissance and Baroque focused institution, which is great. I really enjoyed those courses, but did I need to take, 12 on the same period? Probably not. It would have been nice to, have the kind of foresight, or to have, the insight that I have now to broaden my horizons a little bit, or even take, just a generic Canadian history course. Like, why wasn't that on my radar? I took a Canadian art history course, but it was very fringe, right? And that's kind of what we're trying to do here, is to build up some of those offerings at U of T, try to show you that there's some really, really interesting, cool stuff and lots of opportunities. And yeah, I mean, just try to get involved in a lot of stuff. Like I had said earlier, I was not the best model undergrad student, and academia ended up being a good fit for me. But I do know a lot of other of my classmates just kind of decided to do a master's degree because they didn't really know what else to do. And that was sort of the prescribed route for them, the prescribed path, right? Like Loryssa was saying, like you don't really know that you have options beyond that, but there are. And the ones who continued just kind of grudgingly to an MA hated it, absolutely hated it, and kind of found themselves a little bit later. So don't do it just because you feel like you have to, right? There are a lot of different choices, and it's not for everyone to keep on the academic path. And I wish that I had known about some of these amazing careers like Alexis and Joelle and Loryssa have, because that knowledge is great. There's other stuff out there, and I know that there are other people who work for architectural magazines. They're writers. There's someone I know does research for a columnist, for an architecture critic, right? There's lots of different kinds of things that maybe we wouldn't know exist. So look around, do that asking, and we're trying to help spread the word. And I think that's why that job shadow is particularly valuable for students, and for students of all levels, really, and anyone early in their career looking to just check out something new.
Great. Well, we're coming to the end here, but we wanted to ask, there was a question in the chat that Will posted. It's great to see a lot of projects revolving around communities that have been historically marginalized through the use of design. And Will is asking, I'm curious, what are the types of support or realities for those who come from those backgrounds in the field in conducting such investigations at your workspaces? So maybe, do you have any particular advice for people who might, come from more marginalized backgrounds, or wonder if, is this position for me? Am I the kind of person that they're looking for? I'm curious if any of you have any kind of reflections on this diversity question.
I mean, I'll start because this is one of the things, when you work with an 135-year-old organization, there is a lot of historical baggage that comes with it. The Toronto Society of Architects did not have women in the society till the 70s. There are a lot of networking groups and a lot of community groups that have emerged that I would say have done a lot of work in advancing and bringing opportunities. A couple of that, one I can mention, BETA, the Black Architects and Interior Designers Association. There is SOCA for South Asian. There's a growing amount of communities that are emerging within the architecture world that are networking opportunities. But I think there's also a big effort from the side of some organizations really to look back and make sure that history is properly represented and having those communities actually be part of it. So one of the projects we're working at the TSA in our contemporary database, and actually it was through an internship through Jess's studio. So all things connected here. We had a student work on representing contemporary Indigenous places within the database, and those opportunities exist, and they're there. There's a big effort to make them possible. There's a lot of people behind it to make them possible, to find the funding to make them possible, because they're really important, right? And it is a profession, at least from the architecture side, that still is not representative of the society we are serving. But I know there's a lot of people working to make that possible, and a lot of groups advancing work in that area. So if anyone wants contacts for any of those groups, feel free to contact me. I'm very happy to connect you to any of those groups.
Thank you. Anybody else want to jump in?
I can just add, I mean, the first thing, it's such an important question. The first thing is to acknowledge that there's so much work to do. There's no way around that. The fields of architecture, heritage conservation are not traditionally diverse fields. And so there's a lot of catching up on a number of fronts, both in terms of subject matter expertise, in terms of how organizations function from a policy and HR perspective, how we build relationships, whether that's client relationships, community partnerships, relationships with authorities like municipalities. So it's important to say that. And then I think the only straightforward response is that there's I think deep interest in making progress, and that's slow and incremental. But I can say, at least in the organization I'm in and in the ones I'm connected to, that I see it happening in ways that it hasn't in the past. That's a very recent sliver of history. It's very late in the scheme of things, but I'm seeing it happening.
Okay, this is a good moment. Thank you, all of you, for coming. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Joseph, for chairing this with me. We will, if you don't already, please get your name on our mailing list through Canada Constructed. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram for more information about events. We're going to have another Canada Constructed conversation, a little too much alliteration. In March, we're going to be sending out the date, which is going to center kind of almost a follow-up from this conversation on institutions in the field. So who are the organizations that are connected with the study of Canadian architecture? And I think Joseph, any other final thoughts?
No, just want to thank all four of our panelists so much. It's been really great and very inspiring conversation. So thank you so much for talking with us.
Yeah, thank you all. And everybody have a good night, and we'll see you at the next event. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for having us.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thank you so
everyone.
much.